The silk blouse felt unfamiliar against my skin as I gave it one last smoothing. In the hallway mirror, a reflection stared back, a woman I hardly recognized. At 63, I was used to seeing myself wrapped in soft cardigans and practical shoes. The kind of attire worn by someone who'd spent years shrinking herself, fading into the background, becoming easy to overlook. But today was different. Today, I was having lunch with my daughter at the Meridian, the kind of place Alexia Emerson insisted on, with its white linen tables and imported olive oils. She'd said she wanted to talk about some family matters, a phrase that had repeated itself in my head for the past 3 days like a warning bell. In my experience, Alexia's family talks were rarely conversations. They were performances, her patiently explaining what I was doing wrong in my life, as though I were a child who needed guidance or an elderly aunt she pitied. I picked up my old leather handbag. The same one I'd carried for nearly a decade, and double-checked its contents, $47 in cash, my debit card linked to an account with somewhere between $3 and $100 depending on the day, and a business card so faded I almost didn't see it. Harrison and Associates, Wealth Management. A remnant of a life where things like that had once seemed relevant. The drive to the Meridian took 23 minutes. I passed boutiques and galleries I used to browse without a second thought to price tags. Now, I drove my 12-year-old Honda Civic and sent up a silent wish each morning that it would start. I bypassed the valet, parking 3 blocks away where the meters were still cheap, 25 cents an hour. Alexia was already there when I arrived. Her expertly highlighted hair caught the afternoon sunlight spilling through the restaurant's tall windows. At 38, she had her father's sharp features and business instincts, but none of his warmth. Success clung to her like an expensive scent. Understated, yet impossible to ignore. "Mom, you made it," she said, standing just enough to offer a hug so careful it wouldn't smudge her makeup. "You look nice." There was a pause, just long enough for her to silently inventory everything wrong with my outfit. The blouse from Nordstrom Rack I'd convinced myself looked more expensive than it was. The comfortable, decidedly not designer shoes. The absence of jewelry I'd gradually sold to help stretch my social security checks. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look beautiful, as always." I sat across from her, noting how she'd chosen a table in the center of the dining room, perfectly positioned for visibility. Alexia had always liked being noticed. She was scanning the wine list with the same intensity she once used to tackle spreadsheets. "I went ahead and ordered us the tasting menu, I hope that's okay," she said. "I know you've been cutting back lately." And there it was. The first neatly packaged jab, offered with a smile polished enough to look like kindness. "That's very considerate of you, dear." The sommelier arrived, summoned as if by her aura, and began suggesting wine pairings that cost more per glass than I spent on groceries in a week. Alexia nodded along, her manicured fingers tapping a quiet rhythm on the tablecloth, a rhythm I knew from her childhood. It always preceded something unpleasant. "So," she said once we were alone again, "I wanted to talk about Thanksgiving." My stomach clenched. It was still 6 weeks away, but Alexia planned holidays the way generals planned invasions. "Of course," I said. "I've been looking forward to it." "Well, that's the thing." She leaned in slightly, her tone softening in the way it always did when she was about to deliver something she wanted me to accept without argument. "Richard and I have been thinking, and we believe it might be best if we kept this year's gathering a bit more intimate." The words drifted between us like the lingering smoke from a candle just blown out. I felt my hands start to tremble and folded them tightly in my lap, hidden from view beneath the table. "Smaller," I repeated. "It's just, the kids are getting older now. Emma's 15, Jordan's 13. They have so many friends, so many commitments. And Richard's parents are coming in from Seattle, that's already 9 people." She let the rest hang there, unspoken. 9 people, everyone but me. "I see." My voice was calm, though something sharp had lodged in my chest. "And you think having me there would be too much?" Her smile faltered, just for a second. the first crack in her otherwise flawless exterior. Mom, please don't turn this into something it's not. It's not personal. It's just, she hesitated, searching for words that might land softly. Well, to be honest, things have felt a little strained lately. Alexia's voice softened, but not with empathy, more like a prelude to something sharp. Richard's family, they move in a certain kind of world. His father just wrapped up a long career as senior partner at his law firm, and his mother? She's on the boards of 3 charities. They're used to a particular environment. A certain level of conversation. She looked at me meaningfully, as if I might not grasp her subtle code. You know what I mean, right? People talking about global travel, investment trends, current affairs. Everyone contributes something. Another pause. Another expertly measured slice of judgment. But lately, you've seemed, her words trailed, searching for a diplomatic cruelty. You've seemed a little, out of step with all that. I knew exactly where this was going. Richard actually mentioned something from last Christmas, remember when his mom was talking about their cruise? The Mediterranean one? Of course I remembered. The memory surged up like an undertow. Beverly Bono, Richard's mother, had detailed every lavish stop on their 3-week luxury voyage while I sat silently, painfully aware I hadn't taken a vacation in 4 years. I remembered escaping to the restroom and staring at myself in the mirror, willing some shred of dignity to carry me back out there. I remembered how she'd laughed about the price, only 12 grand a person. Honestly, not bad at all. I'd wanted to vanish into the tiles. I was listening, I said quietly. I was interested in her stories. I know you were, Mom, Alexia replied, her tone sympathetic but firm. But that's exactly what I mean. You were listening, not engaging. And it makes everyone uncomfortable when someone at the table obviously doesn't relate. The first course arrived, some delicate sculpture of baby greens and foam, artfully presented but completely unrecognizable. I stared at it as Alexia continued deconstructing my presence in her life. The thing is, we want everyone to feel at ease, including you. And I just think you'd enjoy a quiet day more, at home, maybe watching your favorite movies, ordering something nice. I could even drop off a plate for you the next day. Leftovers. Like tossing scraps to a stray mutt circling the back door. I gently set my fork down and finally looked straight at my daughter. Really looked. Not the woman in designer heels with flawless mascara, but the child who used to cling to me during summer storms. The teenager whose heart I'd held after her first real heartbreak. Alexia, I said slowly, are you telling me I'm not invited to Thanksgiving because I don't have money? Her cheeks flushed ever so slightly, but her voice didn't waver. I'm saying we want what's best for everyone. And sometimes, that means recognizing when a situation requires a certain kind of social grace. The kind you might not feel completely comfortable with anymore. The words hit like a slap. But something strange happened. I didn't crumble. I didn't apologize or try to smooth it over. Instead, I felt something else. A clean, searing clarity cutting through years of buried shame. I reached for my purse. My movements were calm, even graceful. I think I understand exactly, I said. Mom, don't be dramatic. This isn't personal. It's entirely personal. I stood up. My legs felt stronger than they had in months. And you're right about one thing, I don't belong at that table. For the first time, Alexia's mask slipped. Her mouth opened slightly. Wait, where are you going? We haven't even figured out the check. I've finished. I smiled. And I'm sure your social fluency can handle it. I walked out of the Meridian without looking back, past the confused hostess, past the curious stares of diners who'd heard only snippets. I didn't start trembling until I reached my car. But the shaking wasn't from humiliation or grief. It was something else entirely. Purpose. That night, I sat at my little kitchen table, the light dim, my tea gone cold beside me. In front of me lay the old business card, its edges softened with time. Harrison and Associates, Wealth Management. I picked up my phone and dialed the number, my hand steady. Harrison and Associates, this is Janet Waters speaking. Hello, Janet, I said. This is Diane Carson. I'd like to speak with someone about liquidating some assets. 15 years had passed since I last stepped through the doors of that glass-paneled building. It looked much the same polished marble floors, same cool lighting, same air of effortless affluence. But I wasn't the same woman I'd been back then. And today, that felt like power, not loss. Janet met me in the lobby. Her polite smile dimmed slightly as she took in my plain outfit, my no-frills demeanor. I could almost see her mental gears turning, trying to place me, trying to understand who I was. She had no idea. Was I truly worth her time? The hesitation in her eyes echoed the same calculated restraint I'd seen so often in Alexia, that curated mask of polite distance. It didn't rattle me. It solidified my purpose. Mrs. Carson? Please come in. Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Charles looked older than I remembered. His hair, once a deep brown, had turned a distinguished silver, but his handshake was still strong and assured. His office hadn't changed much either, still overlooking the river, still carrying the subtle scent of expensive cologne and aged leather. As I eased into the chair across from his polished mahogany desk, I noticed the way he was watching me, that familiar blend of curiosity and cautious concern. It was the same look he'd worn after David passed, back when I refused to let anyone, including my children, see the full extent of our financial reality. Diane, he said warmly, it's been far too long. How have you been holding up? I'm doing better than most people would assume, I replied, evenly. He arched an eyebrow at my tone, but didn't comment. Good to hear. Janet told me you're looking to access a portion of your portfolio. Can I ask what's brought this on? I'd rehearsed my answer countless times in the sleepless nights since lunch with Alexia. But now, seated here, the words felt heavier. More final. I'm preparing to make a significant charitable donation. Charles leaned back, his expression shifting from polite curiosity to genuine interest. May I ask to which cause? The Southeast Asia Children's Future Initiative. I'm looking to contribute around $3.5 million. The silence that followed was stark. I could hear the faint whir of the air vents, the murmur of distant traffic bleeding in from 15 stories below. Charles picked up a pen, then slowly set it down again, a familiar gesture from the past, from conversations that were always difficult. Diane, he said carefully, that's a considerable amount. It would account for roughly 60% of your available liquid assets. Have you spoken with Alexia about this? Or with a financial advisor? I haven't spoken to anyone. Because it's my decision to make. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I made no effort to soften it. Charles, I've lived like a pauper for the past 5 years. Not because I had to, but because I wanted my children to build their own lives, to stand on their own, to develop grit and pride and self-sufficiency. That's commendable, he started, but I cut in. It was a mistake. I leaned forward, placing both palms on his desk. Do you know what my daughter told me yesterday? She told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. Because I don't fit in anymore. Because I lack the social polish to keep up with her husband's family. She's embarrassed by me, Charles. Embarrassed by her lesser mother who doesn't speak the language of stock portfolios and Mediterranean cruises. Charles set his pen aside again, this time giving me his full attention, the kind he reserved for clients whose lives were coming apart at the seams. And you want to make this donation because of that conversation? I want to make this donation, I said slowly, because I've watched my own daughter become someone I barely recognize. Someone who confuses wealth with worth. Who discards people who can't play her version of the game. I thought I was teaching her strength, teaching her humility, but I clearly failed. I raised a daughter who only values power and prestige. Saying the words out loud felt like exhaling something poisonous I'd been holding in for years. I gave her every tool to succeed, but not enough heart to remember where she came from. Meanwhile, these children I'm donating to, they don't have the luxury of worrying about social fluency. They need antibiotics, clean water, classrooms with working lights. They need someone to believe in their futures without attaching conditions to their dignity. Charles opened a leather folder, revealing account summaries I hadn't reviewed in years. The numbers surprised even me: David's life insurance, his pension, our long-term investments. They'd grown quietly in the background while I clipped coupons and counted pennies. "If this is what you truly want," Charles said slowly, "then we'll need to plan carefully. There are tax implications and timing considerations." "But Diane," he hesitated, "what happens after? This will leave you with much less than you started with." "I'll still have over 2 million. That's more than enough. I'm not interested in dying with a padded portfolio." "And what will you tell Alexia?" The question landed like a clean strike, precise, deliberate. "I'm not going to tell her anything," I said, my voice firm. "She'll find out the same way everyone else does." When the Southeast Asia Children's Future Initiative announces the largest donation in their history, Charles's eyebrows rose. "You want this made public?" "Very public. On national media, with my name attached to it. I want the world, and everyone in Alexia Emerson's carefully curated circle, to know exactly what her so-called embarrassment of a mother was capable of doing." For the first time since I'd walked into the room, Charles smiled. Not the polished, professional kind. A real one, touched with respect, and maybe a little awe. "You know," he said, "David always said you were tougher than you looked." David never had to hear his daughter suggest he wasn't good enough for a seat at the family table. We spent the next hour reviewing paperwork, planning the steps required to liquidate the necessary funds while preserving my financial independence. As we worked, I could feel something breaking loose inside me. Not rage anymore. Not shame. Resolve. For 5 years, I'd made myself small. Swallowed my pride. Let my daughter's silence and her husband's patronizing tone pass without response. But that part of my life was done. 3 hours later, I walked out of Harrison and Associates with a steady stride. The gears were already turning. In 2 weeks, the donation would be finalized. A press conference would be held. And I would stand in front of cameras and explain exactly why I'd chosen to invest in the futures of children with nothing, rather than keep clinging to a family who already had more than enough. I drove home slowly, winding through the scenic streets that cradled Alexia's world, the manicured neighborhoods where her children attended elite private schools, where she and Richard hosted elegant dinners filled with laughter, wine, and upwardly mobile conversation. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of Phase 2. I was going to vanish. Not literally. I wasn't a teenager storming out of the house in a dramatic fury. But I was going to extract myself from her life so completely that she'd finally understand the weight of my absence. No more pitiful holiday invitations extended out of obligation. No more strained phone calls where her voice adopted that delicate sympathy people reserve for tragic situations they don't want to fix. No more of her attempts to appear charitable by including her embarrassing, out-of-place mother in gatherings where I was clearly the odd piece in an otherwise polished puzzle. I would give her what she seemed to want, a family polished and pristine, untarnished by my presence. And in doing so, she would come to understand what that cost her. That night, I sat down at my computer and started sending emails. To the few friends I still spoke to, I explained I'd be away traveling for a while. I contacted utility companies to set up autopay. I reached out to my landlord to request a temporary suspension of my lease. Alexia had made her position clear. I was no longer part of her story. So I would rewrite mine without her in it. As I typed, my mind drifted to the children who would soon benefit from the donation. Children who didn't assume a warm meal was waiting for them, who knew the worth of everything they received, who would grow up understanding that being overlooked by the world didn't mean you had to stay small. That sometimes, the best response to being underestimated, was proving people wrong. I printed my boarding pass for a flight to New York, where I'd connect to Bangladesh. In 3 days, I would stand in front of cameras and announce my partnership with the Southeast Asia Children's Future Initiative. And I knew Alexia would be watching. For the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see her reaction. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. I was already up, standing in my cramped kitchen with a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold as I stared out into a drizzly Portland morning. Her name flashed on the screen. That familiar jolt of anxiety tightened my chest, a conditioned reflex born from years of conversations that left bruises she never acknowledged. But this morning, I was different. This time, I held the power. I let it ring 4 times before answering. My voice was calm, even. "Hello, Alexia." "Mom." Her voice cracked, pitched higher than normal. "Mom, I saw the news. On the morning show. They said," she stopped. I could hear her quick, shallow breathing. "They said a woman named Diane Carson donated $3.5 million to a children's charity in Asia. Please tell me that wasn't you." The pause stretched between us, heavy with what she wasn't saying. "Please tell me that Diane Carson isn't my mother. Please tell me the woman I've written off didn't just make national headlines for something extraordinary. Please tell me I haven't misjudged you so completely." "Yes," I said, plainly. "That was me." Silence. So long I almost thought the call had dropped. $3.5 million, Mom," she finally whispered. "How? Where did that even come from?" She faltered again, the implication dawning. You've had that money this whole time?" "Yes." "All this time? While I was worrying about you? While you were living in that tiny place, driving that old car, shopping at..." She didn't finish, but I knew where she was headed. Discount racks. Bargain bins. Dollar menus. "Yes," I said. "All that time." "But why?" she asked, the words barely escaping her. "Why would you live like that when you didn't have to? Why would you let me think you were struggling? Why let me worry about you?" I set down the cold coffee and moved into the living room, settling into the threadbare chair where I'd spent countless nights reading borrowed books, watching basic TV, living within the humble life I had chosen, not because I lacked options, but because I believed it served a greater purpose. While Alexia built her image of my inadequacy, I was building something else entirely. "I wanted you and your brother to find your own way," I said quietly. "To earn your success. To know what it feels like to create a life, rather than inherit one. I figured if you knew about the money, you'd never find your own sense of achievement. So, all these years, you were faking it? Pretending to be broke?" "I wasn't pretending anything. I chose to live simply while you built your own success. I was genuinely proud of what you accomplished on your own. But the things you turned down," she said, her voice rising, anger starting to overshadow disbelief. "The vacations we invited you on. The dinners. The gifts. You made us feel guilty every time we enjoyed something you couldn't afford. I never asked you to feel guilty. You didn't need to. God, Mom, do you even realize how many nights Richard and I stayed up talking about whether we should step in? How often I worried about what would happen to you if something went wrong, if you got sick or hurt." The irony clanged in my ears. All that concern for my imagined fragility, while systematically cutting me out of her life for not fitting the image she needed to present. Worrying about my supposed vulnerability, even as she dismissed me as too awkward, too outdated, too poor for the company she kept. "I'm sorry you lost sleep over it," I said sincerely. "That was never my intention." "Then what was your intention? Because right now, it feels like you've been lying to me for 5 years. My intention was to raise children who valued more than wealth. Who judged others by their integrity, not by their income." The words hit their mark. I heard her inhale sharply. I could almost see her face contorting as the meaning registered. "That's not. I don't judge people by money." "Don't you?" She faltered. And I knew exactly where her mind went, back to our conversation at the Meridian. Her polite but firm explanation for why I shouldn't come to Thanksgiving. Her concern that I couldn't keep up with conversations about yachts and nonprofit galas. Alexia, I said quietly, just 2 days ago you told me I wasn't welcome at your holiday table because I didn't fit in with the successful crowd. Because I made your in-laws uncomfortable. What else am I supposed to believe? I wasn't ashamed of you being poor, she said, almost too fast. I was worried you'd feel left out. Was it that? Or were you afraid I'd embarrass you? She went silent. Longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, almost childlike. Maybe I didn't handle it well. But you have to understand. The way you've chosen to live, the way you decline things, it's like you're from another world. Richard's parents, they earned everything they have. And when someone acts like they resent that, or like it doesn't matter, it makes people uncomfortable. And now that you know I could have lived that way too, that I chose not to, what does that change? I don't know, she whispered. Her voice cracked. I honestly don't know what to think anymore. I stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet street where I'd lived humbly, anonymously, for half a decade. The neighbors barely knew my name. My daughter had written me out of her picture-perfect narrative. But all of that was about to change. In less than 24 hours, I'd be on a flight to Bangladesh. A week from now, I'd be helping staff a mobile clinic in Myanmar. In a month, I'd be helping build a school in a Cambodian village. For the first time in years, my life wouldn't be defined by what I lacked, but by what I gave. Alexia, I said, turning back to the phone, I'm not angry that you've done well. I'm proud of your accomplishments. Truly. But I am disappointed that somewhere along the way, you decided that people only mattered if they could hold their own in a conversation about 5-star resorts. That's not what Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you decided I wasn't worthy of your family's time based on assumptions about my bank account. And now that you know I could have matched any of you dollar for dollar, you're not upset about how you treated me, you're upset I didn't tell you sooner. The accusation hung between us, heavy and undeniable. I imagined her in her spotless kitchen, granite countertops gleaming under pendant lighting, trying to piece together how the woman she'd quietly dismissed had suddenly become a national headline. Mom, she said hesitantly. Can we talk about this in person? Come over tonight. Please. I think we need to. I can't. I'm flying out tomorrow morning. You're what? I'm headed to Southeast Asia. I'll be working with the Children's Future Initiative, volunteering in their clinics, helping with school construction. I'll be away for about 3 months. 3 months? Mom, you can't just vanish like that. What about Thanksgiving? What about Christmas? And there it was. No questions about the kids I'd be helping. No curiosity about the work I'd be doing. No concern for my safety or health. Just panic over how my absence would inconvenience her. I thought you'd already made it clear I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. That was before I knew. Things are different now. Are they? Or are you just worried about how it looks, cutting out the woman who just made national headlines for her philanthropy? That's not fair. Isn't it? I could hear the tears in her voice now. Quiet, broken sounds that carried me back to scraped knees and childhood heartbreaks, moments when a mother's arms could fix the world. But we weren't mother and daughter in that way anymore. We were 2 women standing in the wreckage of a relationship we both let crack. And nothing about this could be fixed with a hug and whispered reassurance. Mom, please. Don't leave like this. Let me fix it. How? The word came out sharper than I meant. How exactly do you plan to make this right, Alexia? Are you going to erase what you said at the Meridian? Pretend you didn't push me out of your life? I'll explain everything. I'll apologize. I'll tell Richard's parents I was wrong. And what about your kids? What will you say to Emma and Jordan when their grandmother magically reappears at the dinner table after years of being absent? What story will you tell them to make that make sense? There was only silence. And we both knew why. I'll be back in March, I said finally. We can talk then, about what kind of relationship we're capable of having from that point on. But Alexia, I need you to hear this. I paused, steadying my voice. I'm not the same woman who accepted your judgment 2 days ago. I'm not going to feel ashamed for being who I am anymore. I ended the call before she could say anything else. My hands were calm as I placed the phone down. Outside, Portland's familiar drizzle had returned, soft rain falling in a rhythm I'd come to know like a heartbeat during 5 years of quiet, deliberate solitude. But tomorrow, I'd wake up to a different world. A world of sunlight and heat and voices that knew how to be grateful because life had taught them nothing was promised. For the first time in years, I was heading somewhere I was truly needed. The airport in Dhaka was a symphony of motion, calls echoing in Bengali, reunions unfolding in hugs and tears, the scent of cardamom and diesel in the dense air, clinging to my skin like a second layer. I should have been exhausted after nearly 2 days in transit, but I felt more alive than I had in a decade. Donna Albright found me near the arrival's gate, her smile as warm as the humidity around us. Her sun-lined face radiated calm energy, her silver-streaked ponytail and practical clothing a quiet testament to decades of meaningful work. Diane Carson, she said, her voice a mixture of welcome and respect. You made it. How was the journey? Long, I said, adjusting the strap of my single carry-on, but worth every hour. I'm ready to begin. She chuckled, genuinely delighted. Most donors want a photo op and a press release. You're the first who's insisted on rolling up their sleeves. We walked together through the buzzing terminal as she outlined my schedule. 2 weeks at a medical clinic here in Dhaka, a month in Myanmar helping set up a new school, 6 weeks in Cambodia supporting a nutrition program, and the final stretch in the Philippines, documenting impact for the Foundation's annual report. The media coverage of your donation has been incredible, she added as we climbed into a battered taxi that looked like it had seen decades of traffic chaos. CNN wants to follow up. We've had calls from 3 more networks. If you're open to it, we'd love to schedule a few interviews while you're here. Of course, I said. I wasn't proud of the quiet satisfaction that came with the thought of Alexia seeing more headlines about her mother's charitable work, but if my story could help the children more, then perhaps some good could come from all this brokenness. The clinic was located in a part of the city that would have shocked Alexia into silence. Cramped alleys, makeshift homes of rusted metal, barefoot children running through puddles while their mothers washed laundry in cracked buckets. It was raw, alive, and real in a way my life back home had never been. Dr. Hazel Del Laura ran the clinic with unshakable authority. Small in stature, her eyes were sharp, her hands always moving, administering medication, organizing supplies, comforting a crying child. Her Bengali was flawless. Her presence, commanding. Within an hour of arriving, I was put to work doing intake interviews and assisting with basic care. You speak gently, she said after watching me talk with a young mother holding her feverish toddler. The children trust you quickly. Have you worked in pediatric care before? I raised 2, I replied, though the words felt distant. Had I really raised Alexia and Michael? Or had I just been the woman paying the bills while they grew up on their own? But this is different, I added. These children are different, Dr. Del Laura said, nodding. They know how to appreciate what they're given, because they've learned not to expect anything. Later that night, I called Charles Harrison from the volunteer dormitory. The connection crackled and lagged, but his message came through clearly. The publicity's made waves. We've had more than $200,000 in new donations since your announcement. That's wonderful, I said. She's been trying to reach you, he said lightly, as if commenting on the weather. Who? Your daughter. She's called the office 3 times, asking for your contact info. What did you tell her? I told her you were traveling and would get in touch when it suited you. But Diane, she sounded upset. Are you sure you don't want to talk to her? I glanced out the small window beside my bed, watching children in the alleyway below. They chased a makeshift soccer ball fashioned from knotted rags, their laughter ricocheting off the weathered concrete walls. Pure joy. Unfiltered by status or comparison. Just play. Just now. I'm sure, I said. Life here settled into a rhythm that felt more natural than anything I'd experienced in years. Mornings were spent on clinic rounds, distributing medication, calming frightened little ones. In the afternoons, I taught basic English to teens who balanced school with the weight of supporting their families. Evenings were for writing, notes about the work, yes, but also about the quiet changes unfolding inside me. On my 10th day in Dhaka, I was helping assess a severely underweight girl named Rashida when my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something told me to look. Mom, it's Emma. Aunt Alexia gave me your number. I hope you're okay. I miss you. Emma. Alexia's 15-year-old daughter. My granddaughter. A child I barely knew beyond the awkward Thanksgiving hellos and carefully managed birthday calls. I'd always been expected to smile, to be grateful for the scraps of family time, to stay quietly on the periphery. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Rashida shifted in my lap, drawing my focus back to the small, fragile life in front of me, one who had known hunger in a way our American family never had to comprehend. I didn't respond right away. That evening, after Rashida had been admitted for monitoring and I'd completed my shift, I found myself typing back. Hi Emma. I'm okay. I'm in Bangladesh volunteering at a clinic for children. How are you? Her reply came almost instantly. That's amazing. Mom's been crying a lot since you left. She won't say why, but Jordan thinks it has to do with something she said to you. Did you guys fight? Teenagers. No tiptoeing around conflict. Just straightforward curiosity. She wasn't trying to stir anything up. She simply wanted to understand why her family suddenly felt tilted off-center. We disagreed about some things. Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out. Are you coming back for Christmas? Mom keeps asking but won't call you herself. She's acting weird. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down and climbed the narrow staircase to the rooftop terrace, where volunteers gathered most evenings. The air was thick with humidity and laughter. A young German nurse was recounting her day on the pediatric floor, her face lit up with the fulfillment that comes from doing work that matters. These children bounce back faster than back home, she said. They're just so thankful to feel better. They don't take healing for granted. Without thinking, I said, my daughter takes everything for granted. The word startled even me. She's successful. Accomplished. Beautiful family. But somewhere along the way, she learned to value people based on income and status. If you don't have the right credentials, the right look, the right house, you don't count. That's pretty common in privileged societies, said Joan Issue, a longtime volunteer from Canada. When basic needs are always met, people create new criteria: education, wealth, social standing. They forget kindness is the only thing that really matters. I thought if I lived simply, she'd see what was truly important. That she'd admire character more than money. But instead, she learned to disregard anyone who didn't meet a certain standard. She learned that from me too, I suppose, in my silence. Joan tilted her head. So now you're teaching her a different lesson? I'm showing her what she gave up. And what was that? The question lingered between us. The buzz of motorbikes below. Distant laughter. Warm air clinging to our skin. What had Alexia really lost? A mother who would have gladly covered her kids' college tuition without being asked. A grandmother who would have taken Emma and Jordan to see the world, to teach them through experience. Someone who would have quietly stepped in during hard times, never asking for credit. But more than money or travel or security, she'd lost love. Love that showed up, no matter what. That cheered her victories without envy. That forgave her failures without judgment. She lost her mother, I said at last. And she made that choice rather than expand her definition of who deserves a place at her table. Joan looked at me thoughtfully. Will you forgive her? I don't know, I said. Right now, I'm more focused on figuring out who I am when I'm not apologizing for being alive. That night, I opened my journal and wrote. Day 10, Dhaka. Treated 47 patients. Rashida smiled today, for the first time since she arrived. Her mother wept with gratitude. And I realized, this was the third day in a row I hadn't once thought about what Alexia thought of me. This is what it feels like to be truly needed, not merely tolerated. The next morning, a CNN News crew arrived at the clinic. They wanted to film a segment on my donation and, more interestingly to them, my decision to volunteer on the ground. Sitting in the cramped clinic office surrounded by supplies funded by that donation, I imagined Alexia watching the interview from her sleek home in Portland. Mrs. Carson, the reporter asked, why did you choose to give such a large sum to children's charities in Southeast Asia instead of supporting local causes back home? I turned to the window, looking out at the line of children waiting patiently to be seen. At the International Volunteers, here not for fame or applause, but for something deeper. Purpose. Belonging. These kids, I said, they don't take anything for granted. Medicine, education, the simple fact that someone gives a damn about them, it's all received as a gift. They don't measure generosity by how wealthy the donor is. They don't care who you are. Only that you cared. And that's important to you? The reporter asked. It's the most important thing in the world, I answered. As the camera rolled, my thoughts weren't on Alexia at all. They were on Rashida, healthy now, because someone had made sure she got the help she needed. On the teenagers I was teaching English to, whose lives were expanding with each new word they learned. For the first time in 5 years, I felt fully in place. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't care one bit whether my daughter approved. 3 months later, I stood in the departure lounge at Manila's airport, rain slipping down the windows as I waited to board my flight back to Portland. My skin was tanned from the sun, my body slimmer from the daily labor of volunteering. My hair was shorter, courtesy of a no-frills haircut from a barber in a Cambodian village. But the real changes, the ones that mattered, weren't visible. Tucked into my carry-on was a thick folder of letters and photographs. Rashida, smiling wide beside her mother outside their home. Teenagers from my Myanmar class, several already accepted into universities, something impossible without the language training we'd done together. Growth charts from the Cambodian nutrition program, each one showing a child climbing steadily out of malnutrition thanks to a steady stream of meals made possible by my donation. But the letter that stayed closest to my heart was the simplest. Written on plain notebook paper, it carried 43 signatures from the school we built in a remote village in the Philippines. Each child had written one sentence in carefully practiced English. Thank you for believing we are worth helping. Worth helping. That phrase repeated in my mind throughout the long flight across the Pacific. These children, who had so little, understood their own value in ways my successful, secure daughter never had. They didn't question whether they deserved education or care or decent food. They accepted those things with a deep, unshakable gratitude born from knowing that life doesn't offer guarantees. While I was in the air, my phone had buzzed again and again. Missed calls from Alexia. Texts from Emma and Jordan. Even a rare voicemail from Michael, my son in Seattle, who usually kept his distance from family tension. Emma's messages were the hardest to ignore. Each one more urgent than the last. Grandma, please call. Mom's really upset. She keeps saying she made mistakes, but won't explain. Jordan says she's looking up plane tickets to Asia but Dad says she can't just go. Please tell us you're okay. We're really worried. Her words were simple. Sincere. Free of pride or performance. She wasn't trying to manipulate me. She just wanted her grandmother to be safe. It was the same open-hearted love I'd been surrounded by for 3 months in Southeast Asia. As the plane descended into Portland, I made a decision. I would see Emma. And I would see Jordan. But if Alexia wanted a place in my life again, she'd have to work for it. When I stepped back into my apartment, it felt like I was visiting a stranger's space. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. The well-worn furniture. The tiny kitchen where I'd warmed endless cans of soup. The modest bedroom where I'd spent years reading borrowed books instead of buying new ones. But the woman who lived here before, she didn't exist anymore. But I wasn't the same woman who had once lived that quiet, minimized version of a life. I'd been home exactly 47 minutes when there was a knock at the door. It was Alexia. She looked worn out, gaunt, with shadows under her eyes and the strained expression of someone who hadn't had a full night's sleep in months. Her hair, normally styled to perfection, was carelessly tied back. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, a far cry from the tailored blouses and heels that used to define her. "Mom," she said, her voice catching. "You're really back." "I'm back." I didn't invite her in. I didn't move aside. We stood there in the doorway, two people awkwardly navigating the uneasy terms of a reunion that neither of us quite knew how to begin. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 months," she said. "I know. I saw the CNN piece. And the other stories that followed. I've watched them all. Read every word." She hesitated, like she was groping for the right thing to say. "The kids you helped. The clinics, the school. I'm proud of what you did." "Are you proud of what I did?" I asked calmly. "We're just glad that your mother no longer reflects poorly on you." The blow landed. Alexia flinched, her carefully composed exterior beginning to crumble. "I never thought you were an embarrassment," she whispered. "You once told me I didn't know how to present myself around successful people. You said my presence made your in-laws uncomfortable. What would you call that, if not shame?" "I'd call it the worst mistake I've ever made." The words spilled out in a rush. I've gone over that conversation 1,000 times. I've lost sleep. I've cried myself sick. She stopped to breathe, voice trembling. "I turned into someone I can't even recognize. Someone harsh. Someone I never wanted to be." I studied her face, watching for the manipulation I'd grown used to, the carefully rationed emotion meant to sway, to soften, to control. But there was none of that now. What I saw instead was rare, real, unguarded sorrow. "What is it you want from me, Alexia?" "I want," she began, then paused. She knew better than to offer a rehearsed answer. "I want to understand how I became the kind of daughter who could say those things to her own mother. I want to find a way to undo what I've done." Her voice cracked again. "I want my mom back." "Which version?" I asked gently. "The one who struggled and made you feel ashamed of your privilege? Or the one with enough money now to pay for your kids' futures?" "That's not fair." "Isn't it? Because it sure seems like you only started wanting to fix things once you realized I was no longer poor." The tears came then, freely, without resistance. "You're right," she said. "God help me, you're right." When I found out about the money, my first reaction was relief. Relief that I didn't have to worry about you anymore. That you could finally take part in the family, in vacations, in holidays. That I didn't have to feel guilty for having things you didn't. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, her voice hoarse. "But then I started watching all those stories. You helping kids who had nothing, kids who were thrilled just to receive medicine or a proper meal. Kids who didn't care how much you had or didn't have. They just saw your kindness and loved you for it." She paused. And it hit me. Those kids got the version of you that I pushed away. They got your heart, your patience, your time. All the things I decided didn't belong in my world. All because I thought you weren't good enough to sit at my table. Her words hung in the air like a confession in a silent chapel. It was the first time in our adult relationship that Alexia wasn't making excuses or trying to spin the story. She owned it, fully, painfully. Emma asks about you every day, she said softly. Jordan keeps wondering when you'll come for dinner again. They don't understand why their grandma vanished. And I don't know how to explain it, because the truth makes me sound like a terrible person. What is the truth, Alexia? The truth is, she said, voice low, I became someone who chased the wrong things. I inherited Dad's ambition, but not his warmth. I forgot that the strongest person I've ever known was my own mother, the woman who raised 2 kids, backed her husband's career, and still had enough love left to give away to complete strangers. She paused to gather the last bit of strength she had. The truth is, I want to be more like the woman those kids in Asia think you are. Someone who gives without needing applause. Someone who cares simply because it's the right thing to do. Someone who measures people by their kindness, not by their wealth. Someone deserving of being called your daughter. I glanced past her to the quiet street where I had lived unseen for 5 years, ignored and overlooked. Then my thoughts shifted to the children I'd left behind in Southeast Asia, children who would grow up knowing that even when the world seems indifferent to your existence, there's still someone willing to invest in your future. Alexia, I said at last, I'm not the same person I was when I left Portland. I'm done apologizing for simply existing. I won't shrink myself to make others feel comfortable. And I refuse to pretend that what happened between us doesn't matter. I don't want you to pretend either. I want the chance to earn your forgiveness. How? She asked quietly. Any way you'll allow. Whatever it takes. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. Come in. I want to tell you about a little girl named Rashida, who taught me that gratitude and love are the only currencies that truly matter. As Alexia stepped inside my modest apartment, I saw her taking in the simple furnishings with a new perspective, not judgment this time, but something closer to understanding. She eased down onto the worn couch, moving carefully like someone navigating unfamiliar ground. Tell me about all of them, she said. Every child you helped. I want to grasp what I lost when I decided you weren't worthy of my family. So I did. I told her about Rashida, the English students, the children in the nutrition program. I showed her photos, read her letters. I shared the overwhelming gratitude that surrounded me day after day for 3 months, the sense of purpose that came from being genuinely needed, not merely tolerated. And as I spoke, I watched my daughter's expression shift, not back to the girl she once was, but toward someone new. Someone finally beginning to understand the difference between having worth and seeing it in others. Mom, she said when I finished, would you think about joining us for Thanksgiving this year? Not because you can afford to add to conversations about expensive vacations, but because we need you there. Because Emma and Jordan need their grandmother. And I need to remember what it feels like to have a mother who's proud of me for the right reasons. I really looked at her then, for the first time in years. She was still polished, still successful, still living a life of comfort and privilege. But something deep inside had changed. The cold, calculating edge that marked our recent exchanges was gone, replaced by something softer, more genuine. I'll think about it, I said. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was hope. And after 5 years, that felt like enough.